Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Starkstruck, a podcast where we talk with Starknet builders about stuff that get them interested and how they got where they are. Today, we have Brian and Jane from ZKLend. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Henri.
And yeah, thank you guys for joining us today. So you guys are building ZKLend. Can you introduce in a few words what ZKLend is?
Yeah, I can take this one. So, hi everyone, I'm Jane, and a little bit more about ZKLend. We are building a money market protocol, also known as a lending protocol on Starknet. And actually, ZKLend is the name of our project, but we are actually building two dApps. One is called Artemis, which is our permissionless product. So think of it as anyone with a wallet would be able to interact with the protocol to deposit and lend and borrow. And then the other side of things is our institutional product called Apollo. And the idea for that is really targeting institutions to get whitelisted in order to access the protocol and borrow and lend. The idea is with the institutional arm, we would be able to utilize things such as under-collateralized lending, as well as attract retail money to deposit and potentially lend to institutional players. So on a very high level, in a nutshell, that is what we do.
Very cool. Thank you. So let's start with telling us a bit more about you guys. Where do you guys? So you both are based in Asia, right?
Yes, Brian is actually maybe 5 feet away from me right now. So we're both in Hong Kong.
Do you guys work in an office?
Yes, we do.
And how many people are at the ZKLend?
We are about, I can't even keep count anymore, but I think we're about 11 to 12. So there's 4 of us on the business side. There's Brian, myself, Emma, who is our CMO, as well as Raul, who is heading up a lot of our community management and business development. And on the tech side, we have 7 people. Jonathan, who is our tech lead, whom you've met, Henri. We also have a project manager, a front-end developer, a full-stack developer, as well as a couple of UI, UX leads.
And when did you start with ZKLend? Like, how long ago did you start this?
Yeah, so we started ZKLend technically end of last year. So it actually hasn't been that long. Or maybe it has been. I don't know, because the blockchain space is like 3 months is a long time. But we came together really by chance. Brian, which he'll talk a little bit more about, he came from TradFi. Jonathan comes from, obviously, blockchain development space. And I come from the startup world. And I think we all bring to the table something a little bit different. And all our interests also lie in different places in some ways. But all of us really wanted to go out there and build a project, especially in the space of DeFi and especially in Starknet. So that's kind of how we came together. It wasn't like we had a perfect idea to start out with. It was kind of like the 3 of us met, decided that we like working with each other, and we slowly molded a project together. But yeah, it started last year.
Very cool, thanks. Getting from 0 to 11 in 9 months is not trivial. Like, it's not that easy to onboard new developers and new members in a fast-moving environment like that. So congrats on that. So Brian, you come from TradFi. Can you tell us a bit more about your background? What did you study, and how you started your career?
Yeah, sure, of course. All right, back to what I studied. Actually, I studied engineering physics back in Canada for my undergrad, and so I was studying quantum mechanics and thermal and fluid dynamics, and did a few internships, and quickly discovered that I'm not that interested in applying the actual physics and learning about how tiny particle move in vacuum box, or how light bends around an object and putting it into real life application. So
wait, you mean you liked the theory but you didn't like the practice, or the theory was interesting but not that much?
I find the theory very interesting, but the actual application of it actually falls short because one, what you learn, it's really theoretical and it's really cool, but the actual application of it, it's a lot of time very mundane, and the research side becomes kind of falls off very quickly and becomes the application of just a repetitive of what other people are doing and refining the process. So, for example, the field that I look into was more power generation and thermodynamics. And along that line, basically as a junior engineer, you would be looking at designing, for example, feed pumps and how fluids go between the heated fluids to cooling it off and the whole cycle repeating again. So it sounds cool on a very short 30 seconds chat, but if you really go dive into it every day working of it, it becomes a very repetitive process with very little outside interaction. So it's not really for me. And so after graduation, I was like, okay, I need to do something that's more people focused. And I really fancy finance at the time. So right off the bat, after graduation, decided that I want to move into finance field. So for the past 13, 14 years, I've been in the traditional finance space, working in investment banking, and then moving on to I started with FX structuring and then investment banking and then private equity before joining and starting ZKLend. And yeah, that's pretty much the background story. I'll pause here first.
I mean, how do you switch from physics to finance? Did you just go knock on the door of a bank and say, "Hey, can I work for you?" Did you do some training?
It was a different time. One where actually a lot of banks, they do fancy a lot of different disciplines. For example, they do take in people from liberal arts, from history, from poli sci, like political science. And they actually do fancy a lot of engineers because one, they do have the financial background, they do have the mathematical incline. And the role that I was getting into was a management training program. So they actually give you a bit of time to rotate between different rotations and between front office, back office, and risk and things like that. So at the time, I was really interested in the FX trading side of things. So FX structuring options, forwards, futures was something that I really liked. Did that for about 6 months before decided that I want to do something with a little more project based. So doing capital markets deal and capital markets, equity markets transactions.
Really nice. And so you stayed there for 10, 14 years, you mentioned.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And was it actually as interested as you hoped?
Yeah,
I imagine you wouldn't
was.
have stayed 14 years if it wasn't the case.
Yeah, it was a really good time for the Asia capital market space, both in terms of equity and also in terms of fixed income. The economy is booming, and then especially for Hong Kong, the China deal flow was really pumping up during that time, and also Hong Kong is the capital channel for going into the PRC, and the type of deals that we do, and also the complexity of it was really fascinating. But because the pace and also because the lifestyle, I decided that after did that for about 7 years, 8 years, and decided I want to move to the buy side, where I would be more focused on doing actual investment deals, outbound investment deals, rather than doing IPOs, doing bond issuance.
Really interesting. Thank you. And so you were in the core of TradFi, and you went to build money markets in DeFi. Let's roll back a little bit. How did you first hear about blockchains?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I had a few friends that are very, very early in the whole crypto and blockchain technology. So back in around 2015, 16, I started hearing them talking about it, and it was the first time I hear about Bitcoin, not blockchain as a whole, but Bitcoin. It was a really interesting investment. It was something that you have to mine, and it's for me at the time, I didn't really understand the full complexity of it, the full explanation. So it was something to my mind. It's like a digital gold or a storage of a wealth of some sort. And at the time, I thought it was interesting, but wasn't really too convinced of the technology and the application at the time. And also, one main concern I had was the security issue and how complex it is to set up a cold wallet. So didn't look too much into it. But it was around 2000, 2020 when the whole DeFi summer came, and that totally got me by surprise, totally blindsided me, and how much I've missed in that zone. So started to look into it like a lot more intensely and looking at different DeFi protocol.
What's
And
the first
yeah,
project in DeFi that caught your attention? What made you realize like, oh wait, there's something there?
yeah, actually, strangely, it was Uniswap because before that, I was holding a little bit of, for example, the different altcoins and tokens and on Binance, but it was mainly just hold and keeping it there and wait for the price to go up and then just sell it. So it's just a really speculative investment, so to speak. And it was after DeFi, and then I also had a friend that worked in the field, and he started talking to me about all the cool stuff. And so I started to migrate myself a little bit from the centralized exchanges and then going into the DeFi side. And one of the first experience was, swapping tokens. And so it was basically my first experience dealing with MetaMask and then using it to swap tokens and waiting for it to complete. And at the time, it was really revolutionizing for me. But obviously, right now, looking back, it was pretty silly. But yeah, so that was back in, I would say, early 2020 already.
Very nice. And so you started looking more at the space and thought, oh wow, this is interesting. And little by little, you grew in an interest to that
Yeah, that's right.
eventually led you to build
Yeah,
ZKLend
yeah,
in
yeah.
2022.
Exactly, exactly. So I think swapping was something that I thought it was interesting, but didn't feel that I would be able to participate really on a full-time or professional capacity. But after looking at other different lending protocols like Aave, Compound, and some of the other ones that are coming up for institutional side, and then realizing the possibility of not having a centralized person or centralized entity to control it, and basically anyone could access it. Like that was a huge thing for me because working in a bank, working in a very regulated environment, there was always a set of rules or a set of boundaries you're bound to play with, and going into DeFi, it seems like really we can really push the boundary and create something that's um, not according to the conventional sense and being able to benefit everyone within the community. So that was huge. And I started to talk to friends and see how I can participate. And I think that's kind of the story of how ZKLend begins. It was kind of, we got a mutual friend with Jane and John, and we started talking, and we didn't have any idea what we want to build. But it was just all three of us wanted to build something in the DeFi space. And ultimately, we got in touch, and the narrative, the idea, and kind of our skill sets complement each other. And we just talk and see how we can create something cool, create something that we would each have our expertise and be able to thrive in the new financial age.
Wow, that's really interesting. Thanks, Brian. So, what about you, Jane? Where do you come from? What's your background? What did you study?
Yeah, so a little bit different than Brian. I actually studied both econ and history. So a little bit more focused on the humanities side.
What?
So
Oh, wait, you studied history in Asia.
No, I actually studied I went to school in the US. So I went to university in the US. Spent many years there, like I would say almost a decade. And so I've always been a bit of a history buff. And I think I just might have pressed a button, but when combined with econ, I really fell in love with the idea of economic history. And it's something I still talk about a lot to this day because I think it's super fascinating. And it kind of segues into like the blockchain space and all of this unfolding, right? For me, I remember studying about the tulip mania, the South Sea bubble, and then the railway stock market, and then the financial crash. And then I think about like Bitcoin and I think about Ethereum, and I'm like, I'm living the very moments in history that someone 100 years from now would be reading. So for
Yeah, I
me,
get the feeling that there's a lot of people it's hard to explain what the blockchain is, what Bitcoin is, and some people often like, yes, so it started with shells and then we move on to gold.
Yeah.
But and then sometimes it feels too long, and people get lost when you explain it. But that side of things, like how us society as a whole exchange value and how technology affects it, is fascinating. So I totally get what you mean.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and especially if you think about like the Industrial Revolution, right? Or sorry, I'm going into this, but like the South Sea
Please go.
Bubble, right? The whole point of it is like the British Empire had all these resources and all these technological advances that came about through their expeditions, and
Can
like
you
through
give
that.
us like when was that exactly? Like I'm a
So
bit
I
familiar
think
with it, but if you can give more
yeah, that
context,
was
it would be wonderful.
1720. So the South
Hmm.
Sea Company from the UK, I think what happened was they started selling a lot of stock, and basically the proceeds of this stock sale would finance a lot of their expeditions. And so there was a huge speculation going on because I guess the people of Britain would be like, okay, well, I think that there's a lot of potential in this company. And I think that, they're going to find a lot of, I don't know, they're going to trade a lot of merchandise, let's just say. And so, with that, people obviously bought into it. And hopefully this doesn't happen, but afterwards it's called a bubble for a reason. So then came the market crash, and it seems that every 100 years or so that railway mania came about in 1820, roughly around that time, and then in 1920 came the Great Depression. So it seems like history repeats itself every 100 years, but hopefully not in this case.
Well, and these things are bubbles, of course, and they have downsides, but there's also a big upside to that. I mean, like we got railway out of it, and we got a lot, as you mentioned, a lot of technological good things out of the previous mania. Obviously, had some bad downsides to it, but it's not all bad, I'd say.
Yes, absolutely.
Really cool. So you
So
studied economics and history.
yes, I did. But then I guess afterwards, similar to Brian, I also went into finance. Seems like it's the path that everyone a couple years back, that's kind of the path that a lot of people go down.
And
Uh,
you were in the US at that time, or in the UK?
yes, I worked in New York for almost 2 years. And I started out in sales and trading, which was quite interesting. Realized that really wasn't my cup of tea.
Hmm.
Um, and then I transitioned into private banking back in Hong Kong. So
Okay.
a
How?
very
So you spent like 20 years in the US, and then you moved back to Hong Kong.
No, I spent about a decade in the US. So I went to high school in the US. I went to college there, and then I spent about a year and a half working there before I moved back to Hong Kong.
And how was moving back?
Um, it was fine. I guess on a personal level, it's a bit tougher because obviously I went to college there. A lot of my friends were there, but from a professional point of view, actually Hong Kong and New York share a lot of similarities. They're both big cities, financial capitals. A lot of established banks operate kind of their hubs out of both regions. So from a professional standpoint, it wasn't actually that big of a transition. Obviously, Hong Kong is a lot more China focused, and US being US global. But overall, I wouldn't say that it's actually that different.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So you went into private banking in Hong Kong,
Yes.
and
Dealt with a lot of wealthy people, a lot of entrepreneurs. And I wondered myself, okay, well, how do I become an entrepreneur at some point? What does it take, right? Um, and so actually, I kind of did like my 2 years because that's what like people tend to do, like they work in banking for 2 years and then they quit their jobs. Unlike Brian, who really stuck through it, they quit their jobs and then they go for something else. So I actually went out to work for a startup called Deliveroo. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, and so completely 180. Worked on the ground in a startup, helping scale kind of the food delivery business in Hong Kong. Just as it's
Deliveroo is like where is the company from?
so it's a British company.
And they were expanding in Hong Kong.
Yeah, so they were expanding out in Asia, um, and I think back then was when food delivery was still like limited to like Pizza Hut, KFC. Um, I don't even know what else does delivery.
It
Like
was not.
looking back,
It was kind of the same in France. I know in the US there was a lot more of a culture of getting takeout food. In France, it was not the case at all. Like you would get it from time to time, but it was not common at all. And then these companies, Deliveroo, and a few others came up, and now it's much more common.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it really changed the way people view like takeout and like the way they view like meals. I understand in Europe, like mealtime is actually a social activity as well. So as you kind of say, like maybe food delivery wasn't so common, but now it's become a much more accepted idea.
Yeah, definitely. So you helped scale Deliveroo, and like, when did you hear about blockchain or Bitcoin, or what was the first project, the first crypto project you heard of?
Yeah, so actually, the first crypto project I heard of was sushi,
Hmm.
which is quite interesting because I guess in some ways it is like a fork of Uniswap. But I guess similar to Brian, the way I first heard about blockchain was, I heard about Bitcoin sometime back in, let's just say 2014, 2013, while I was still in college. And it still felt like a very remote idea at the time. Like, unreachable. Like the idea, okay, well, there's this cryptocurrency, but like tangibly, how do I actually get a hold of it? And I think when Ethereum came around in like 2015, that's when I heard a little bit more about it. But back then, like to actually transact and like buy ETH and BTC was incredibly difficult. I think there were literally like OTC companies that did it for you. There were like Bitcoin like ATMs where you could buy cryptocurrencies, but it's by no means as easy as going onto Binance or going onto crypto.com or using your MetaMask to swap certain items right now. So it was pretty obscure to me up until I would say 2019, 2020, when the idea of MetaMask, the idea of being able to exchange some of your cryptocurrency or transfer some of your cryptocurrency on off ramp and into kind of your self custody wallets, that for me became a tangible idea of something that I would be able to execute on.
Really interesting. And so the first product you used was SushiSwap?
Yeah, because I watched a lot of Finematics back then. I don't know if you know
Hmm.
Finematics.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but they were talking about I forget who that guy was called, but the founder of sushi. He had no, I think it's like Chef No Me or something. There was like a lot
Yeah.
of drama around Sushi Swap. And so I was intrigued, right? I was like, oh, all this crypto drama. Like I want to read into it. And like,
The whole SushiSwap story like this was really fascinating. Yes.
yeah, yeah. And then like, I guess like SBF also got involved. So for me, it was a perfect hook to actually like, okay, well, what is sushi? Let me try it out.
Very cool. And so you got
Yeah.
little by little into the space, and that's when you got in touch with Brian and Jonathan.
Well, it wasn't as abrupt as that. Similar to Brian, actually, my brother went into crypto a couple months back or a couple years now, and a couple of my friends also went into it full time. So, through dinner conversations, I was always the annoying one that was like, "Please explain it to me, please. I don't understand." And after
I
a
mean, like
while,
you can see it as annoying. It can like when you're passionate about something, and everyone's like, "This is just a toy. It's not really interesting," or like, "This is a scam." I think somebody being legitimately interested is usually kind of a nice thing, and you get to
yeah,
share something you care about.
yeah, like I'm interested because I don't understand, right? Um, so yeah, so I guess like after a while, it was like, okay, well, like this is pretty interesting to me. I've used a couple of protocols. Um, on a personal level, I also felt that it was time to move on from my career at Deliveroo. The company had just IPO'd in 2021. Yes, 2021, early 2021. So I was like, okay, well, what next? I know I really enjoy working at startups. I know that I want to do something a little bit more financial related because I had a finance background and I actually did my CFA while I was at Deliveroo. So like, how do I actually make it work? But I knew I didn't want to go back to a bank because it was just too rigid for me.
Really, really interesting. Thank you. And so when you guys got together and you felt like, okay, we're not sure what we want to do, let's do something. How did that process go? Like what how do you go from we're not sure what to do to we have a product on Starknet ready to be deployed? Because that's where you are right now, right?
Yeah, I think I can kick us off, and then Jane, please feel free to add in the color, more color of the story. Um, I think it was more us coming on with the whole L2 narrative first, and then we feel that Ethereum, and then starting to get buy-in that it is the chain to go if we want to build DeFi for the long term. And the whole L2 narratives come into mind, and CK Rollup starts to get tractions, and we start reading into it more intensely and tracking the development of the whole space between, for example, Starknet, ZKSync, and all the other Hermes at the time and Scroll at the time. And so we felt that this is the space we want to build on. And once we have that angle, we were thinking, okay, with our background, what can we build that actually help scale with the entire ecosystem? And the fundamental DeFi Lego block for us, it's basically we wanted an exchange, AMM, or a lending protocol. And so the idea of building a lending protocol automatically struck with us because for myself, I've been on both sides of the lending table, and so it's something quite natural to me. And I think Jonathan and Jane also had the conviction that this is something that will help a lot of protocol scale and also help onboard a lot of users onto the ecosystem as well. So we felt that this is actually the puzzle that we want to help fit in. And so, that was kind of the one, I would say, a process of elimination, but two, we kind of had an idea of where we want to build, and ultimately it's just a match of skills and a match of interest for all of us.
Nice. You talked about, yeah, sorry, Jane, do you want to add something?
Yeah, just a very quick point, which is I think lending protocols, in terms of its evolution, still has a long way to go. The way we've kind of viewed AMMs is, the way we kind of view like trading in general is, blockchain started out with AMM because of computational capacity, and then came a couple of order book dexes that have kind of replicated the existing financial systems. I think with lending protocol, we're still at a very, very early stage. If you look at Aave, or formerly ETHLend, we're still thinking about lending in a way that's quite constrained to the protocol itself. So interest rates are determined based on utilization of the pool within that protocol, right? And so there's still a ton of opportunity, because in real world TradFi, interest rates are not determined based on how much demand is within that bank. It's actually determined by how much demand is within the entire market. And so, long story short, I do think that there's still a lot of runway to go for lending. And that's kind of where Brian and I think we could really unleash kind of our learnings.
Yeah, I mean, let's make this long story not so short and expand on that. I think it's a really, really interesting topic. I think the blockchain world in general was designed by engineers, and a lot of projects are still designed by engineers, and it sometimes feel that engineers or we are reinventing something that already existed, that was already developed in another context with different primitives, and it definitely in something different, but that some things that we see emerging in the blockchain market feels like, oh wow, this is so new and so cool. The first time I heard about Aave, I was fascinated. I really liked the product. And I really think that they what they do on Ethereum is fascinating. And I remember presenting this. I was working at an insurance company at the time, presenting this to the CEO, saying, "Hey, look, you can do that. Here's how it works." And the guy just told me, "Oh yeah, it's called a Lombard loan, right? It's a 150 years old financial concept." And I went up and looked it up, and yes, that's exactly what it is. And this I knew about this before, but this is a confirmation to me that when you want to build something, sometimes you go from the same basic primitives. Exchanging value and loaning are basic primitives, I'm curious, you guys, with your financial background, what do you see as powerful primitives missing in DeFi that are in TradFi that need to be implemented, or that would benefit the whole ecosystem to if they were implemented? Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, so I mean, maybe I can start, which is I think the interest rate market is something that is like completely missing right now in the blockchain space. So as I kind of mentioned, right, how are interest rates currently determined on lending protocols is it's based on how much money is deposited into that specific pool on, let's just say Aave, right? Like forget about like cross chains. It's literally like on Ethereum, however much ETH is deposited into that pool determines your borrowing rate for ETH on Ethereum layer one. That rate might be different on Optimism, even though it's still Aave. That is a fundamental like fragmentation.
And I saw somebody mentioned that this is the case right now. The rate for ETH is 9% or something on Ethereum and 2% on Arbitrum for the same protocol for Aave, but just different pools.
Exactly. So I think that's step one. I think step two is actually derivative interest rate products. So like interest rate swaps. That's a huge market in the US. How do people actually bet on interest rates rather than having to like deposit ETH and then like earn an interest rate based on a collateral? Like these are derivative products that haven't really been created just yet. So I think that is probably something that will come down the line as well.
Yeah, and I think for my side, I think lending exchanges, these has been around for centuries. And down the clock back a little bit, if we look at what the TriFi ring is trying to do back in '08, they have started to temper with, for example, collateralization and securitization, where effectively it's just basically compartmentalize or tokenizing a certain assets. But it's not working as effectively because at the time there wasn't any transparency. There was everything is controlled by certain banks. For example, Lehman at the time that was underwriting a lot of these securitizations. But I think these are all very important tools to have because instead of having two players, having two parties that actually just borrow and lend against each other, you are decentralizing that loan and being able to ultimately sell it off to individual holders to take part in a larger scale. And I think that has been tried back in '08. It wasn't successful, but I think with the technology of DeFi and blockchain, I do see that this is a possibility where, for example, a very, very large loan can become tokenized, and because of the transparency and decentralization component of it, it's very accountable, trackable, and ultimately all financing would become a kind of a pull or a crowd effort instead of a bilateral agreement between two parties facilitated by one or two banks.
Interesting. Well, thank you for these insights. And so I'm curious, you both are not devs, so I can't ask you coding questions, which is fine. I don't ask much of these anyway. One that I'm curious about, when you have to work for, say, a couple of hours or 3 hours and you need to get focused to work, what's your routine? What do you do? Do you listen to music? Do you sit in a quiet room in the dark? What do you do? Or just sit at a computer and work?
I'm the worst. I get distracted really easily.
So how do you avoid that?
Yeah. So what I generally do is I give myself a little bit of break time before and after. So I don't usually time crunch. So if I know that I have a 3-hour period that I need to focus, I wouldn't necessarily pack my day to the very, very maximum because I know my attention span can only last for so long. And then what I do is I go hide out in a corner and I play some classical music and I work it out. I often time box myself as well. So I think of it this way, right? If there's a task that takes 3 hours to complete, but because I'm fidgety and I'm distracted and I take 4 hours to complete, it basically takes away from my day on things that I could do otherwise. So I very much kind of mentally prepare myself, and I force myself to complete something within 3 hours if I can.
Nice. What about you,
Yeah,
Ryan?
I think it's roughly similar. Before starting it, actually, I need a little bit of mental preparation. In if it's going to be a long task, I usually do that in brainstorming and shower. I think for some reason, for me, taking a shower and thinking actually it's quite intuitive. It brings things down quite easily for me during that time because I just my mind just wander and things become easier a little bit more easier. And once I have like the key steps to what I need to do, I'm gonna need to break it down. I usually pick times for actually doing these type of really concentrated tasks. So I either do it very early in the morning or very late at night. Because I think during the day there are just too much distraction in terms of phone call, messages, emails, um, and I mean you would wander off just checking I don't know Twitter. So I tend to just really focus on those two times and budget at least like 3 or 4 hours during that time for me to work on it. If I can't do it in 3 or 4 hours, I would just wait until the evening time to finish it. So I think just gotta mentally prepare and pick my battles.
Nice. Very cool.
What about you, Henry? I'm curious. I know this podcast is you're interviewing us, but
No, it's fine. Usually, when there's something I need to do, it kind of stays in the back of my mind for a while, and especially it depends on what it is. But when it's something like it tends to percolate a little bit, and once I have and eventually I know what I need to do, and I know I need to do, and I can just just execute. And at that point, I just allocate some time and play either drum and bass or psychedelic rock, and just code or do what I need to do, and then I'm done and I'm happy.
That's awesome.
That's what I do. Cool. Thanks for the insights, guys. So yeah, let me back a little bit. So you guys have arrived in the space not so long ago, right? You started ZKLend in 9 months ago, but as you mentioned, Jane, things move very fast, and so the space has shifted quite a lot in the past 9 months. I'm curious how you saw the ecosystem change, or the dev experience change, or the landscape change in the past 9 months, and what you see as things that get you excited or afraid for the following 9 months.
Sure, I can take a first stab on this one. I think we have been lucky and unlucky to experience quite a bit of a great cycle within the 9 months, where when we start, I think the whole market scene was rosy and things are going up. And it was in the mid of our development where the Luna crash happened and the market tanks and gone to a historical low for some time. And I think through the entire cycle, compared to my initial experience coming in, I think the entire ecosystem becomes, for lack of a better word, less chilling. Not a lot of projects are solely based on a very hype narrative, or it's just a very quick fork of another project and just relying on solely on marketing and being able to succeed. What I start to see right now, I think a lot of protocols, a lot of builders are actually really focused on one, the scalability of it, whether it's sustainable, and actually whether there are any innovations in what they're creating. I mean, even if it's not innovative new ideas, but it's going to be optimized way of doing what existing projects or existing protocols have been doing. I think these are adding value, even though incremental, but still adding value to the whole ecosystem, where they may not be the final product in let's say 3 to 5 years. They may not be relevant, but at least they're all small steps to move forward in the whole ecosystem. And I think that's a really good trend that I'm seeing, instead of people just trying to make quick bucks, trying to make a name for themselves in the space.
What about you, Jane?
yeah, I think Similar to Brian, one of the things I've really seen is just the quality of the community has really gone up, just in terms of people really seeking to learn and utilize some of the protocols rather than a lot of pure shill kind of projects out there. I think specifically what I want to talk a little bit more about kind of the Starknet ecosystem is just I actually think the Starknet ecosystem has gotten a lot more inclusive than at the beginning. And I mean this in the best way possible because, when I first approached Starknet or started to understand kind of the inner workings of the network, it's actually quite complex for someone like me who's not a developer. And you see that the early adopters of the ecosystem also tend to be pretty established developers. So it can be a little bit isolating at times, or it can feel like it's a small community that where resources just aren't there, right? Because it's still very early. But as I kind of witnessed at Dev Connect as well as Starknet CC, I'm seeing a lot more diversity within the ecosystem, whether it's developers, projects, or even I forget what they're called, but even like I guess educational programs, right? Like in code, all these guys coming in, I feel a lot more comfort, and I feel that on a personal level, I've been able to find more. I've been able to I guess connect with even more people as the time has passed.
I see what you mean. There's a higher variety of profile. It's just not hardcore devs who are deep into the math and the pointers and all of these things. You get newcomers, people who are starting to build something, and educators who want to teach people how to build new things. And you're right, the ecosystem has expanded quite a lot in the.
Yeah, and I think in this way it does feel a little bit more. It feels more inclusive, which is great.
Wonderful. You guys are based in Hong Kong. How's the Web3 scene over there? I'm asking this as a European. I'm not sure how things. I'm not very familiar with the Web3 scene in Asia in general and in Hong Kong in particular. Are there a lot of Web3 devs? Are there a lot of programs? I'm sorry, of projects. And is the Hong Kong scene and the China scene totally different? Are they linked? Are there exchanges?
I can talk a little bit more about this. I think it's actually quite reflective. Like what's super interesting is it's actually quite reflective of kind of the character of each city. So for example, like Hong Kong is a financial hub and so is Singapore. So what you tend to see actually is that it does translate in the Web3 world where Hong Kong is actually quite concentrated in terms of VCs and investors, but a little bit less focused when it comes to projects and developers. And that is kind of the nature of the city as well. A lot of people go into financial services to begin with, and I don't know if it can be translated in the same way as in the U.S. or in Europe, but certain places where it breeds a little bit more creativity, you tend to see more projects kind of pop up in that area. But yeah, so
where would be that place in Asia? Is it like first that comes to mind, but maybe that's stupid. Is Shenzhen? Are there a lot like that's an industrial center, right? There's a lot of innovation over there.
So the only thing is cryptocurrency is actually banned in China. So don't know how I don't know how developers can really operate out of China. The reality is, but I am seeing a lot of developers from Taiwan. So that's an interesting one. And actually that kind of helps me draw the parallel because Taiwan has historically been actually quite tech focused. If you think about like semiconductors and hardwares. And so we have actually seen a couple of projects come out of Taiwan. Don't know if there's anywhere else within Asia. I guess Korea and Japan, but the ecosystem is a lot more like language specific. So like with Korean and Japanese, because I don't speak either, it's difficult for me to comment.
Yeah, cool. I think one more point to add on this is, I mean, Singapore and Hong Kong being a developed and financial city, we're actually fighting for a lot of resource between the Web2 and Web3 space. So even for hiring new talents, I think the existing talents, a lot of them are diverted into the Web2 fintech space. There are innovations over there, and I think they do attract a lot of very high quality developers. So for now, they provide the safety, they provide the scales, because a lot of Web3 companies, they are a much smaller scale and they're patchy here and there, and they don't get a lot of government support just yet. But on the Web2 or the fintech space, it's already kind of proven and they do have a track record. So I think the trend is moving, but right now we're still in the space of kind of competing and kind of converting Web2 developers coming onto Web3. And that's especially how I think educator like Encodes and, for example, only that they're doing so well in terms of helping the transition between some of the Web2 developers into Web3. So I'm quite positive in that sense, and I do feel that there are tons of talents that's going to be coming from I would say Southeast Asia and all across the North Asia as well.
Cool. Okay, thanks for answering this. We're reaching the end of the podcast. So to conclude, can you talk a bit about what do you guys have in store that gets you excited to work on ZKLend? I mean, I'm not asking any like sensitive information, but I'm curious, like, what are you working on today that make you go think like, oh wow, this is gonna be cool once it's it's done?
Yeah, I mean, I can start, and this is a little bit far out, but Brian and I have actually been doing some work on Apollo. So just to remind everyone, we're actually building two protocols within ZKLend, Artemis and Apollo. And I think what's really interesting is for Apollo, we started looking at borrowing and what institutions want, right? Like, does it make sense for us to list 5 different assets so that they would be able to borrow all 5? Or like, what do they really just want USDC so that they can potentially use that money and swap it themselves? So we've been thinking a lot about that, and also been thinking about fixed rates. So that's another part that's really interesting, because if I'm just making this up, but if I'm a market maker, I probably need a lot of liquidity. And to access this liquidity, I also want certainty over how much interest I would be committing to. So does it really make sense for me to pay a variable rate every day, or have a variable rate that changes 3 times a day? Or should I lock the interest rate at the start of the loan? So this is something I'm personally very interested in. And also just thinking about like interest rates and how they converge or diverge from traditional markets, because we don't live in like a siloed world where if you want to borrow money from Web3, it's just about what the supply and demand on Web3 might look like. It's also about what alternative options these institutions have. Like, can they go out to a bank and borrow USD at like, let's just say 3%? Why would I borrow it in Web3 at like 5%? So how do these interest rates actually start to converge? And that's something we're actually very interested in. And Empiric has actually brought it up. They recently replicated, or they tried to build a yield curve on BTC. So potentially, in the future, if we're actually able to build an interest rate curve on USD or replicate the UST treasury curve, it might actually help us price some of our loans.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on that, I think what Jane said, it's this is what we're working on, and this is kind of in the medium long term. But I think as a whole, I'm still very excited about kind of making history, being in the driver's seats of it. And I think down in the next couple of years, we will start to see more institutional coming in. And by institutional coming in, it's not just in terms of money, but in terms of other form of assets being able to convert into the crypto space. For example, let's say if they have a certain commodities trading contract, that could be as collateral for a crypto lending, or they could be even other just mortgages that they can have basically counterparts on the crypto space being able to borrow against that. So I do feel that the real world and the DeFi world are starting to merge, and we are kind of in the blink of history of that conversion.
Nice. I see what you mean. So you're excited about the merge, not the merge everyone's talking about
Yeah,
right
yeah, yeah.
now.
I'm
But
excited about that too. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. But yeah, no, I see what you mean. Is what happens once the Web3 substrate for exchanging value starts interacting with our old way of doing things and how to interact and merge and grow from each other. I agree. It's really interesting. Cool. Guys, thanks a lot for coming on the podcast. Any last words you guys want to add?
No, not in the moment. I think, Henry, you've covered most of it. And I mean, we are actually, I'll have a little plug here, which is, we've gone live with our testnet a month ago now, and we are looking to expand access very soon. So for anyone who's listening in and interested in trying out the protocol, hit us up, DM myself or Brian. We really would love feedback from the community, especially people within the Starknet ecosystem, to help us improve our protocol. So yeah, that's
so. How do we find you?
Yes, you can find us on Twitter. I think our DMs are open. You can find myself and Brian on Twitter as well, or on Discord. We are quite active on Discord.
Very cool. All right, guys. Thanks a lot for your time, and until next time.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.